And you can raise your hand when I call your name. So on the far end, we have Rush Miller from the University of Pittsburgh Libraries. We have Ed Fox, from NDLTD and Virginia Tech. We have Sara Gould from the British Library, and we have Ana Pavani from the Pontifical University, the Catholic University in Brazil. So I wondered if we might just briefly start round robin. You can maybe say a little bit additional about yourself and maybe some basic statement about how you would feel about the ETDs for life, the opportunities, challenges, and benefits. Rush, maybe you can.
Okay. I really have very little to say after listening to Ed and others talk about the opportunities and challenges. I guess, like so many of my colleagues, ETDs are just one very small part of what we do in terms of digital scholarship. And we have a large digital publishing program, we have a large digitization program. We are making major migrations of platforms all the time, and people are under a huge amount of pressure to get things done. And ETDs almost seem like something that we did a few years ago, and we do it sort of, it rocks along now. The grad students don't have any idea they can get out of it. They have to do it. They have to submit their dissertations electronically. Faculty are used to this now. The work is all done online. We offer training programs and assistance, and we put them in our repository. And the metadata is what it is. I'm not sure we're a good example of great metadata ETDs, but we do have metadata. They are reflected in our discovery systems on campus. Not only the repository searching, but we actually have a layer of discovery on everything. And so they get discovered that way, and I think they're in your Union catalog. At least I trust they are. Yes. I'd be embarrassed if they weren't, but I think, but when I hear Ed and others talk about these additional developments that need to occur, I applaud that, and I think that's tremendous, and I hope that as a profession we will move in those directions with their leadership. I won't be around to see it, but maybe I'll become a user of it down the road, but I would certainly go back to Pitt and encourage our systems gurus to give this more thought and more attention, because I think that these are very critical issues. Things like being able to search across, language problems and references and so forth. We're getting close to signing contract for ORCID as well, and so all of this has implications for us too. But I will say that until today, I really had not realized there was the issues with ETDs, the extent to which we need to do all this additional development work, and I'm glad it's going on. I applaud it.
Great, thank you, Rush. Let's mix things up. Ana, would you like to say a couple words? Please.
Okay, as John mentioned, my name is Ana Pavani, and I'm from Brazil, and I have been involved with ETDs for 15 years now. In my university, as a member of the national consortium that my university helped to start. And in our country at the moment, we have 95 ETD programs that cooperate with the national consortium. They're quite stable. We have had some that were born, lived for a short time, and then they died. But I would say 95 are pretty stable. And we have approximately 250,000 of metadata records on our Union catalog. So I think it's a successful implemented project that's running. And at the moment, there are some concerns, both at the national level and at some institutional levels, for the long life of ETDs, which means digital preservation. The runner of our national consortium, the Institute of Information and Science Technology of the federal government of Brazil, has started a preservation program for journals. But at the moment, they haven't addressed the problem of preserving ETDs. And this is something that we have been discussing, and we hope that they lead a national effort because of the huge collection we have. So this is my main concern in the Brazilian scenario at the moment.
Thank you, Ana. May we hear from Sara?
I think that follows nicely on from what Ana was saying, because the first thing I scribbled down was the last 3 days have left, well, the last 5 days, in fact, because I have just joined the NDLTD board, and I'm also a member of the DART Europe board. And one of the things that I've been reflecting on is this whole tree from institutional repository, national aggregation, regional aggregation, and the global collaboration between us all, and at what level responsibilities lie, how we connect to each other, and also, but also how we make sure that we're not duplicating effort. So at each one of those levels, lots of the challenges and opportunities and issues are similar or the same. And it would be great to think through, and when I fall asleep on the train later, I may well be thinking through whether there's better ways or more ways or different ways that we can kind of connect at each of those different levels. So that's something, and one thing that's really important is not to duplicate effort if we don't need to. So, for example, if there's small technical development projects, lots of them happening across the world, how do we make sure that we all really know what each other are doing and take advantage of that development that's going on? At the most basic level, let's not all try and digitize the same theses. Let's have some sort of global record, the NDLTD Union Catalogue or some other record that joins all of these things together. Preservation, I think, is the thing that I'm taking back. It's been in our heads in terms of national, the ethos development of a proper, robust preservation strategy, if you like, for theses. I mean, all of the theses that we have in ethos, I want to reassure my UK colleagues that they are safe, but they're not yet part of a formalised preservation policy for theses. And on a tiny, tiny scale, something that I've never really thought about before is the role of Wikipedia as a resource discovery service. I think Peter Murray Rust said it's taking over as possibly going to be one of the main routes to discovery for theses. So I'm going to go away and look at Wikipedia in more detail when I get back.
Thank you, Sara. And last and certainly not least, I'm going to turn it over to Ed Fox.
I was just thinking, I've been enjoying the food here this week, and so sometimes it helps to use analogies. In some ways, having a university with a very simple ETD program is like having a cafeteria that feeds the students rice. This reminds me of a friend, John Eaton, who Yale and I used to travel with about 20 years ago, who talked about ETDs that were pretty simple. And so if you get beyond rice, you get to maybe vanilla ice cream, which is sort of what a lot of people have. But then he said, well, most people would like something in the vanilla ice cream. They'd like some fruit or some chocolate or something. But John was really interested in good food. So he wanted us to get to the stage of vanilla nut fudge macadamia nut sundaes. So think of how far we can go. And it's not just the actual food itself, but think about the world population. How many students, graduate students in the world, don't even have rice? They're not doing anything in this world. Their research is invisible to the rest of the world. That's a terrible shame and a waste of our global educational system. And so if we really think about the students, and as a faculty member, that's really why I'm at the university. is so that the students that I work with can learn and move on into their professions and their careers. You know, and the grants are just a way to help get them funded and help get them working on interesting projects. Courses are just a way to help move them along. But the ETDs are the thing that sort of puts it all together for them and makes that happen. So if you're concerned about the graduate students, and I think many universities consider them to be very important, and eventually we also will have bachelor's theses and project reports, so undergraduates as well. How can we really make this work for every single student in the world?
Thank you, Ed. Did you have slides to advance, or is this the backing slide?
I can do them.
Sorry?
You want me to do them?
Oh, yeah. Oh, I was going to say if you want to guide this.
You're doing a good job.
We're trying to coordinate.
So I have a few slides to kind of provoke us a little bit. So we're talking.
Are we in the way?
You're never in the way. So, you know, we're talking about lives. So we have lives of the graduate researchers. How do we make them have productive careers from the beginning of their days as graduate students to learn about this whole new world of disseminating information? We saw before the life cycle of information, and then we also have the life of the movement and of the progress of this around the world. We also have new ways of thinking about things. In computing, we call it computational thinking. You know, it's a different way to think of the world. You know, like you go down through a line for lunch, and you say, well, we could actually have people on both sides of the table, and it would be twice as fast. And if we don't have these roadblocks along the way, then we wouldn't have to have people waiting so long. So a different way of thinking of processes and methods. And you heard a little bit about digital libraries as well. So if we put this into a little bit of a tabular form, we have these opportunities, challenges, and benefits on the columns. And then what is it that we're talking about? We have the global movement, and I talked about computing since that's my field, and then we also have digital libraries. So the global movement, the opportunity is to have every thesis and dissertation as an ETD, and to have them really expressive. The challenge is how do we spread the awareness of this? How do we overcome all the inertia in the way from faculty, administrators, leaders, publishers, whatever else, and how do we provide the aid that's needed to make all that successful? And one of the benefits that we've empowered people, we've empowered the students, we've empowered the universities to play a stronger role in our world, and we've enhanced the collaboration that can take place across the whole world. We can do the same thing for each of these others, the computing and the digital libraries. We can talk about collections, for example, and services, and you know, on the bottom right corner, what we want is better life skills for researchers and open access for research worldwide. Those are sort of the bigger goals. And the spirit of this group of NDLTD and the broad movement is to focus on the graduate researcher, because they're going to be the global future leaders. This is the one chance that most of us have to work with these incredibly bright, energetic, creative, wonderful students who are going to be the leaders of the world in the future, especially in the research community. And to change the way they think so they can get into this and support this and think about open access and all the other kinds of things. Because they won't hear that from the faculty. The faculty are focused on the domains typically, except for a few like Peter the other day. But to make that happen, we have to get beyond people's native limitations. One of them is fear. If people are fearful, they can't be empowered. If they're not confident, then they won't share. And this is all about sharing. So how do we get them beyond those concerns? Well, we make it fun. We make the world smaller, as we do here. And we build on other things to make all that possible, and that leads to great things, and everyone's happy, and it can be done. And we have existence proofs that these things can be done. And we talked about this life cycle. And then, again, to put the chart I had before in terms of NDLTD, what are the opportunities, challenges, and benefits for this? As a global perspective, we want more members. So every institution in the world can afford to be a member and help push this forward and help us give more awards and other things. We don't get paid for this. This is all to go out for services. what are the most important priorities for us to focus on? What activities can we get to? And of course, we want more members, more ETDs. On the computing side, we have all these technical things we've talked about. And on the digital library side, we have the things we've mentioned before, the union catalogs, the discovery services, but we face challenges, as I said earlier today, on quality control, on standards, lacking support, making the things work together, the resources that we need for this. But the end goal will be that we'll have really good support for all this to take place. So that may frame some more questions and discussion. You may want to open it up.
Thank you very much, Ed. So I'd like to hear from each of our panelists just briefly what you think. We'll start out with the first concept. What do you think the biggest opportunities for you in going forth with ETDs? Maybe we'll start down at the end again with Rush.
Oh, thank you, John. Well, I want to reiterate what we just heard. The opportunity of an ETD as opposed to a regular dissertation is really to broaden the audience for dissertations. When I was a doctoral student in the dark ages of the 70s, I wrote that dissertation, and I guess it's sitting somewhere in microfilm in ProQuest and on the shelf of one library in the world. And it has probably really never been read except by me and a few of my family to use as bedtime sleep material. When we wrote our dissertations, we had no sense that we were writing for an audience at all. We were writing for a committee to go through an exercise, to get a degree, to then go do something else. In my case, because you couldn't get a job teaching history. So I veered off into libraries to get a job. But I never had a sense that anyone would care about that thing, read it, find it interesting, and that it would have any life. And I suppose I would have milked it somewhat if I had gotten a teaching job and had to have tenure. I would have found a way to rewrite it, but it wouldn't have. Trust me, it would not have been anything resembling the dissertation itself. But today, when you write a dissertation on a campus that is a mandated ETD campus, you are writing that you're understanding that that dissertation, in fact, will be read, it will be accessed, and it will be read by people who are in the academy, it'll be read by people who are not in the academy, it'll be accessed by anyone in the world if it's an open access ETD. And it's a whole different kind of experience. And I think what Ed said is right. It's creating a generation of scholars for the future who understand digital scholarship and understand the importance of open access and understand the importance of broadening the audience for what they do. And I think they'll write them differently. I think they'll think about them differently. And hopefully it will lead to all of their scholarship being digitally based scholarship in open access. That's my hope.
Thank you, Rush. Ana, what opportunities did you feel were most important to you in implementing ETDs?
Well, I think at the moment we see ETDs all over the world, but at the same time, as Ed mentioned, there's some institutions that don't have ETDs, so those students don't have rights. And we have institutions, countries, or groups, or consortia that have been very active and are sort of the wave front of the movement. So I think we have to be prepared to deal with ETD programs in different levels of development. And we have to help each other. The ones who have more experience and have been doing ETDs for a longer time are here to help the others, and the LTD has been doing this. And at the same time, to motivate institutions to keep working with ETDs, we have to develop new products and new services, not only just making ETD available from an institutional repository. So I think that our challenge at the moment is to be able to see all the different degrees of development and be able to address the different needs of each stage of development.
That's great. Sarah, how about in implementing in the UK? What was the biggest opportunity for you?
Well, the biggest opportunity on the horizon, I think, has to be content mining for us, or that's how it seems at the moment. We're really excited about the project we're only playing a very small part in the project that I mentioned yesterday, that the Royal Society of Chemistry is supporting to content mine chemistry PhDs. There's one or two others that we know of that are in the offing. While I've been here just now, spoke to Peter Burnhill. Maybe we're going to supply some ethos theses to the Hyperlink project to help them develop new services that really help the whole remit of open access to theses and dissertations and other online content as well. So that's the single opportunity that I would say. But I think the only other thing to say really is that at the same time, some of the author concerns that Rush experienced, well, what they were concerns when you did your PhD, but I think some of the author concerns are valid even now. So we as library colleagues, it's fine to say, get them out there, open access is good, the research is valuable, but at the same time it is about educating and opening up the eyes of the students themselves about the benefits to them, and I think persuading the authors of the benefits of open theses and really acknowledging their concerns and worries in a responsible way is really important at the same time.
Great. Ed, did you have anything else to add, or we'll move to the next?
Well, I'm in a fortunate situation in that I have been allowed to work with some very bright graduate students and undergraduates as well who are interested in this kind of content mining and other kinds of things. And there's all kinds of technical problems to solve, and we're actually publishing dissertations about dissertations. So it's a lot of fun for that. And I just hope that someday someone else will take up some of these results we've come up with and build some services or systems and put them into practice. Sometimes we can do some of that ourselves, but we need more people to get engaged in this and carry them forward. So hopefully we'll help disseminate the word about these challenges. I guess I'd also like, Akin, can you hear me in the back? We have a friend from Nigeria who's, I guess he can't hear. Anyway, we have some people from different places here who have some really difficult challenges to face. No power, few computers and so on. We need to think of how to work with them. But we also, I think we all know places that don't do this and that don't understand it, or we haven't conveyed it very much. I think sometimes in a family, you get the same food every week, not too much variation, people get kind of bored. So somehow we have to make this more interesting, as I think we've heard from a few people. They thought we were done with this, but we also have to figure out how to inspire people and disseminate better.
Great, thank you, Ed. So here's a fun question. Rush, what do you feel is the biggest challenge in carrying through with your ETD program?
I'm just trying to find a way to phrase it in food analogy. I just keep coming back to the duck tongues I ate in China. I can't. I think there are a lot of challenges that I face on just my campus in terms of ETDs. I still have students and faculty who don't want their dissertations or their students' dissertations on the open web because they think that a publisher won't publish the book they're going to submit to them because the ETD, even though every survey of publishers has disproved that idea. Nobody sees it as the same work when it's a book. But I want to come back to what Ed said at the very end there. I think there's a tremendous challenge of disparity in the world. It's one thing for West Virginia University, where John was, or Pitt, where I am, or Texas A&M, to say, okay, everyone must do ETDs. We have infrastructure to support it, we're going to train you how to do it, and then you'll submit this, and it'll go on our server environment, it'll go into Union Catalogs. But I actually have been doing a lot of work in Asia and Africa over the last few years, or last 20 years in terms of the East, but in the last few years in terms of Africa, and trying to address some of those issues. And we have partnered with a university in Kenya and are providing them with computers and lots of support and technical support and training support. And so I think it would be really interesting for us to sort of do a survey of where are ETDs now being produced, and what kind of support does it take, a minimal kind of support, and what can this organization do, what can we as ETD sites that believe in it do to help, not just help preach about it, but help actually implement it and provide the kind of support that's needed to make it a reality in some of those cases. I know as a publisher, we have just undertaken a partnership with Global Health people on our campus to found a journal for Central Asia in global health, first one ever, but also to mount support systems of all kinds to help faculty members in those universities understand what scientific research really has to be in order to be publishable. And so there's a lot that goes into not just creating a journal, but creating so that all the articles aren't being fed from Britain and the United States and Germany, but can be fed from those areas as well. So I think there's some thinking needs to go on around this, as Ed said.
Thanks, Rush. Ana, what were the biggest challenges for you?
Well, I'm beginning to be a person who keeps saying the same thing every time someone asks me something. There's a very famous music in Brazil from the Bossa Nova time that was called the samba, made with only one note, written with only one note. I'm beginning to behave like this music, but I think that is digital preservation.
The one note samba, I love it. Ba, 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 ba. Sarah, please. Your biggest challenges, Sarah.
I think, I possibly, in the UK, I think probably everybody in this room in the UK who manages theses is also, has responsibility for at least one aspect of the total institutional repository. So I think sometimes we as specialists in the theses management can get a little bit inward focused about the management of the theses, and actually they're only one research output. So I think somehow the challenge might be in the future to move on to recognising theses as one research output amongst many other equally valid research outputs. And on a more personal basis, my challenge in the immediate future is going to be to have a 5-item breakfast at both of our sites belonging to the British Library.
Great. Ed, what are your thoughts?
So actually, I think it's about making connections that's the biggest challenge. Some church groups have sister parishes in a different part of the world. Most researchers have collaborators in other locations. Many universities have sister universities or other institutional representation in other countries or regions. Maybe we need to somehow figure that out and figure who can each of us help, who can we partner with, and do it in a rich way, make it more collaborative, make it more expressive, advance the research in more interesting ways, and show how that collaboration is successful. That's something everyone likes to see, so maybe we can leverage that and turn it into a way to spread this more effectively.
Great. And finally, we'd like to hear about what you think is maybe the single most benefit in implementing ETDs and where that has carried it forward. We'll go back to Rush.
Well, I think I already said this, but I'll say it again a little differently. I think the greatest benefit of all of ETDs on our campus has been, as it contributes to the overall atmosphere of advocacy for open access and implementation of open access. We have become the whole campus is excited about open access. It actually started with the movement for ETDs and is culminated in open access publishing, open access mandate, Senate plenary sessions with 300 faculties in the room talking about open access and excitement about open access. I don't think there's a campus in our country that has more momentum around this whole issue of open access, but I do think that ETDs have helped that tremendously, because when we talked about the necessity or the advantage of having ETDs, it was always in terms of the broadening of the access of graduate students' work. And then as we started talking about faculty members publishing with commercial publishers and how that work could also be opened up to the rest of the world in the way that ETDs work, it resonated better, I think, having had the ETDs implemented first.
And it's come full circle, hasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, amazing. Anna, what do you think the biggest benefit was for you?
Well, I see ETDs as having three different aspects to be considered. The first is that they are products of the process of education, just like senior projects, and so they are outputs. If you look at these ETDs this way, having them published is very good for the institutions, for the countries, because they are making available their products and they can be seen and be assessed, and the quality can be assessed. The second is that they're inputs to the educational process. So the more ETDs we have available, more we support students who need reference, good quality materials to develop their research. And the third, so I think this is good for people who are studying. And the third is that I see ETDs as legal documents. At least in my country, they're required so you can get your degree. If you don't present a thesis or dissertations, you don't get your diploma. And for this reason, I see that the institutions are responsible for the long life of ETDs in electronic formats. And this is our responsibility because they are archival documents. So I think this last one leads me back to my one-note samba.
Great. And Sarah, your feelings on the benefits?
Well, I think the benefits, in a similar way to Rush, I think maybe I've said it already, but the benefit now would seem to be the opportunity to not only offer them for further research on an individual basis, but to use that whole corpus of fantastic, unique research content and draw out trends, analysis, all sorts of interesting bits of content that at the moment is, well, in the paper format at least, is inaccessible, and do some really, really interesting things which go on to develop and further research on a different scale and in a different way to your regular academic activities.
Great, thank you. And before we open this up for participation with the audience, Ed, maybe you can frame the benefits for us?
So we can sort of start for the biggest one. The biggest one is, how do we advance civilization in this world? What does that take? Well, one thing it takes is collaboration, because we have to understand each other and work together. The second thing that most people think about is this whole process of knowledge creation and dissemination, part of which we call scholarly communication, which in part deals with journals, conferences, reports, education materials, and ETDs. The easiest of all of those things to actually make a change in the world about is ETDs, which is why I thought this was a good thing to pursue. And if you show it work somewhere, then it'll work in the others too, and hopefully it'll connect things together. So, in other words, we're all about making the world better.
Thank you, Ed. So we really would like to make this an engaging session. So we've heard wonderful, interesting things from our panelists, and now we'd like to hear from you. So we have microphones that will run around to you. Who has some burning issue you want to talk about, the opportunities, challenges, benefits of ETDs? Wake them up.
We're all ready for the train.
We can ask questions of each other too. It's really interactive.
So that includes problems. That's another definition.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What problems do we still face? What would we like to see? Who wants help? Who wants to help others?
Thank you, Gail.
I'd like to know how we can get students to take advantage of the digital media that are available. Right now, they're just producing theses and dissertations that look just like they did 50 years ago. They're meant to be words on paper and printed out, even though they're only available electronically. So how do we get that? How do we encourage I believe their faculty advisors are really who needs to be convinced, but how do we go about getting them to take advantage of the range of media that's available that they could be revealing their research through in their theses and dissertations?
That's a good question. Anybody want to comment on multimedia
I'll
incorporation?
start, because this is something that we have been discussing. And I think that we have to change the minds of the faculty. They are the ones who want to have a digital version of a printed thesis or dissertation. In my university, we allow different file formats as long as they do not contain information that's not contained in the written format, I mean on the printed format. And so we can add things like videos, but this cannot substitute for something that's on the dissertation.
I would think that one thing we might have done or might do next time is to invite a session or a paper or several papers about multimedia PhDs, non-standard PhDs at a conference like this. So we're often asked by universities in the UK, how do we manage creative PhDs? How do we manage multimedia PhDs? And all of that kind of thing. So we could have between us, we could find some really, really interesting and exceptional examples of a whole range of PhDs that do exist and are moving in the right direction. But I think at the conference this time, we haven't really discussed any of those issues in any detail. So there's probably quite a lot of small things that we could do, our end, to begin to open up that discussion and understand it ourselves as well.
If we value something, then we should applaud it and encourage it and award it. So I think it's wonderful we had two delightful winners of innovative ETDs here, and from the budget of NDLTD we gave a $1,000 award, which to us is a very significant piece of our budget. But it should have been $10,000 or $100,000, and it should have come from the Mellon Foundation or some other major group or UNESCO, or it should have been published in PLOS ONE or Science or Nature. Maybe we need to go in our disciplines and get a special issue of a journal each year that has the most innovative works from students and get them to put this out in front of everybody to see. So let's all think of our context and how we can encourage to make this really exciting and people to then see that, hey, this is something I want to do too.
Yeah, I can't add much except, I think about, it all comes, I think, from the faculty, advisors and committee members. They're just doing what they were taught to do. I mean, they're producing graduate students in the mold they were produced. And so I think we have to break that somehow. We have to get them to understand the other possibilities formats and kinds of things to include with a dissertation that are possible in some disciplines, even really called for. And I think showing is the best way, showing examples of that, of what the power of that in a dissertation.
So I think we're really looking at a cultural transformation, not just a matter of throwing resources out there. And eventually people will come to understand that. I've also heard of some of the first dissertation work that's going to be done on a non-traditional basis. It'll be maybe not exactly a videotape, but there's not going to be a corpus of text that accompanies that. And it's a very new, challenging area. And I don't know where we go from there, but I think it opens up many new possibilities. Other questions? Please, in the back.
Hello, I'm Manju Naika from Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay, Mumbai. Yeah, I've been involving with the ETD almost since last 6 years. I interacted with many of our students as well as faculty regarding to open access of ETD. What our major concern is that there is no clear-cut policy on who owns the copyright of the thesis or dissertation he creates. ND LTD, like an international organization, if they define some ownership or copyright of the thesis, it may help the many countries. At least even author himself, he can put it on web, even if there is no infrastructure is available, either guide. There is no clarity on ownership. The second thing is that everything today is measured on, the major output of the university is the graduates, where they will work, which organization package, and also the funding. So if the around 5-6 years research output, if they put it on the web, on what it counts, if we put it on the free web. These are the two issues. So some solutions, if we found out, it may increase the awareness about the visibility of the thesis and dissertation universally accessible. These are the two issues. This is my personal experience.
So if I understood the first part of your question, you were talking about open access and copyright or intellectual property issues, and maybe we can talk a little bit about navigating.
I don't know about, I have to think about the law itself, but at Pitt, every student is required to sign a document that essentially gives the university a license to publish the material. They sign the same kind of thing to ProQuest. So we have at least limited copyright. The university would own a limited copyright for the purpose of putting this on open access on our repository. So even if you said that the student owns the work, but they don't really, because they can't get a degree if they don't sign a release giving the university a copyright. And they can't put it in ProQuest without signing a release to ProQuest. So I don't think that's, at least in the States, it's not an issue. But they own the right to it if it's subsequently publish it, and we don't have the right to do that, but we can distribute it in a limited basis. So I think that here's the real problem around copyright in my view. There's a lot of things that students put into their dissertations that they don't own the copyright to. So they may well go out and find on the web an image and think, oh, that fits really nicely, and put it in the dissertation. And as long as that dissertation was a print dissertation on the shelf and nobody saw it, nobody was ever going to sue anybody over those images. But as soon as it becomes an open access web-based document, and somebody, a museum, for example, sees an image of the Mona Lisa in somebody's dissertation, in art history, there's going to be a lawsuit very quickly over that. And in some cases, for the students to get releases for those images or clips of video or whatever, to go into a dissertation, it's not cheap. It requires money to get permission. And if it's an open access, the fee will be higher than if it was just a single or limited distribution copy of that. And I don't think, at least we've never addressed that in terms of who pays that fee. You know, we're forcing them to do it, but we're not paying the fees for them to get releases to put things in. What typically happens in our case, and I think in ProQuest's case, is those get blacked out and they're not available. So if an image is not cleared, it just doesn't appear in the online version of the dissertation. I don't know if that answers your question, but, and this may vary from country to country. Copyright is not a universal.
Can I just add a rider to that? I think you're quite right that it does vary from country to country in different jurisdictions. So there isn't a world view on this. I've been involved a lot with data library and similar notions about students' work. Even though a member of staff might require a student to do something, and they might do it using university materials, the product of a student's work is the student, and they own it, and they cannot be obliged to give it up. I mean, they can voluntarily do it if they wish, but they can't be obliged. So similarly, in order to get a qualification, they can't be obliged to give that up. Now that comes under the European Union Data Directive. So those of us who are lucky enough to be members of the European Union and governed by that, that's how that's interpreted. Now the point you made about third-party material, there's a lot of third-party material which is used in academic endeavor. And as you indicated, that of all the things that are open and not open, I mean, you've got open data, you've got open access, etc. Open education is actually quite interesting because most of it used to happen in the closed room of the cloister and was taught and went on closed in the academy, and therefore many things didn't actually bother other people who were rights holders. And clearly the assertion that you could critically take apart the Mona Lisa using a very high definition image to indicate that she wasn't really smiling or some such thing would be, allowed, tolerated, part of the academic endeavor. And as you indicated that, if it were on the shelf, it was et cetera, there were rules whereby you could get it for academic purpose, and so it was not the third-party rights holder wasn't going to be engaged. Putting it on the web, making it open access, begs a lot of questions, but I'm not a judge, I'm not a barrister, so I wouldn't want to be taken any further. But it's, so we had a position where people were digitizing boundaries, and the academic thought that they owned them because they had the students doing this as part of their work. But, academics can't do that, it belongs to the student. And the same is true of the primary school kid. It doesn't belong to the school, it belongs to this primary school kid.
So maybe we should be supporting the efforts of organizations like Creative Commons more, and that's just an example. We have another comment, Gail?
Yeah, I was going to jump in because this is a big area for us at A&M. We've, in the last several years, again, working in partnership with our wonderful grad professionals, we've really revised our copyright clearance policy to absolutely encourage students, and we provide very robust training on fair use, such as it exists in the U.S. And this is aligned with the Association of Research Libraries movement to capture consensus practices and value system around fair use in thesis and dissertations through their code of best practices in fair use. So this is part of what we call copyright self-help, where the copyright law itself is never going to give us clarity, and the chances that we're going to get a case resolved in the courts around a dissertation are rather unlikely, and so we're not going to get legal clarity from the law. But the concept behind a code of best practices and fair use is that before there's a problem, you develop a community consensus document around what everyone seems to agree are pretty clear-cut fair uses. And the process is a research process with a lot of focus groups and a lot of input of stakeholders over several years. And then where there's points of consensus, that's what goes into the code of best practices. Where there's points of difference, that does not go into the code of best practices because those are areas where there's too much divergence of practice and opinion. So the idea of what fair use looks like in an ETD was very much covered in this code of best practices. I was a participant in the focus groups that created the code, and I was very encouraged to see how pretty universally around, at least the ARL community, most people had a sense that including third-party materials in the thesis or dissertation that goes to the institutional repository, unless it's Capella or a for-profit school, but for most of us that are not-for-profit, that there's no, very little risk and very little sense that it is not fair use to include something as long as it meets all four factors, as long as there's been a four-factor analysis, which is what the law requires. I think what gets pushed is when you want to also publish that dissertation in some kind of a commercial outlet, whether you've got a book contract or whether you're going to publish to a commercial dissertation distributor, but that's where the fair use calculation changes, and it may not be fair use anymore. So for us, it's been mostly about education and having lots and lots of use cases and scenarios. We tell a lot of stories. We give a lot of examples in our training so that a student can look at a student that came before them. My favorite example is the archaeologist who wanted to reconstruct the Palace of Babylon in CAD, so that it was very precise as an engineering experiment. And it was so good that the British Library told him they wanted to 3D print the model of what the Babylonian palace looked like because it was the best work they'd ever seen. So it was very quality work, and he used over 200 published photographs, aerial photos, site photos of remains, and other kinds of, and they were all published in like coffee table books and whatever. And we were able to basically contextualize every single one of them. He had to redact none of them. And he cleared the university just fine. Now, when he goes to publish it or put it in another kind of commercial system, that fair use calculation will disappear probably. So to me, it all comes down to education and educating them to make a good, wise choice for themselves, and then giving them the agency to make the choice about what they're going to do and trying to get out of the way, because they are the scholar and they're the new scholar. And if they can't figure out their agency as an author in grad school, I don't know when they learn that. So for me, it's about education.
Yeah, I don't disagree, except I
really
think I would
agency.
advise a librarian dealing with that particular issue to consult their university council. I guarantee you at our university, the council would not agree with what you just said and would not allow us to do that.
Well, in our case, again, this has to be a cultural and a campus discussion, because not only is our university council behind this, we've shifted our entire e-reserves program to the exact same thing, to the Code of Best Practices in fair use. And it was the blessing of the university council that looked at that. And as long as we didn't put textbook on where there was not a transformative argument, we absolutely got there. So I think it's also about educating and having that dialogue with council.
I would just say, we do that with e-reserves as well. It's just, and I totally agree with the code of practice. But for dissertation, there's a real question about whether that's a published work. When you put something on the open web, it is literally being published according to the lawyers I've talked to.
It's also legally published according to copyright law and the Library of Congress. So it's also subject to things like mandatory deposit, unless it's in all digital format, which it gets an exemption. So U.S. law, I think...
It's not easy.
But I think that a lot of campuses within the research library community are really looking to that code of best practices as self-help to allow our students. And the cost of the education is worth it, because every single student we educate around fair use says to us, now they're trying to clear and graduate, so they're in a panic or they're very stressed out at the point of intersection for the most part, but inevitably the comment is, I can't believe I made it through, graduate school and I'm only learning this now. This was one of the most important things I learned. And so it'll be, 2 weeks before graduation, and they'll realize that fair use is one of the most important tools in their toolkit as a scholar in America, at least. So I think that the investment is worth it. And I think that librarians, the more we promote fair use, it's like going to the gym, where we're strengthening that muscle and we're strengthening that practice in our future scholarship. Now, I can't speak to other countries. I know some countries have just gotten a bigger window around fair use, and they're grappling with what that looks like. But I think the U.S. Academic library community is doing a great job on educating and preparing students, like with scholarly identity, these authorship tools, these authorship resources that we have to grow our new scholars to understand authorship issues in the 21st century. And I think copyright is a big one of them. I also think understanding if you're going to reuse licensed content that isn't openly licensed, that again, that license may be perfectly happy allowing their material. So Google Earth is a great example. We have a lot of students who have downloaded Google Earth or created Google Earth images. The license says fine for nonprofit reuse, but we don't want to see our images republished in a commercial system. So again, for the version that goes to the institutional repository, they're okay. It's when they want to put it in something commercial that they will have to reevaluate, get permission, or swap out what they've included.
Thank you very much. And with that, we need to end this session. I'd like to thank our panelists for their wonderful comments. I'd like to thank the audience for your participation. And please remember, you have other burning issues. We're always there, ndltd.org, or get hold of Dr. Fox or one of us, and we will be happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much for helping us to make a successful conference. Ed, I think, unless you had anything else to add, have a wonderful day and enjoy the rest of your time here. Thank you.